Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Nice of you to have joined us from wherever you are joining us, somewhere in the world. Welcome to this webinar on the business case for eco-innovation, future-proofing SMEs through sustainable business models. It's good to see so many of you with us today, and I hope that this will be a useful webinar for you. My name is Ned Clarence Smith, for those of you who don't know me. I'm now currently an independent consultant specializing on the topics of green industry and circular economy. I've worked in the environmental field in one capacity or another for 40 years, 20 of which have been at UNEP, and many of those years were focused on resource efficiency and cleaner production. Recently, I worked with UNEP on the update of its publication, The Business Case for Innovation, that we'll be talking about today. But that's enough about me. Maybe we can have some quick housekeeping rules. Yeah. So just to remind you, this webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the One Planet Network, and the presentation slides will also be shared with you after the session. Now, there will be Q&A at the end, but you are welcome to use the chat function and comment or post questions throughout the session, and we'll try to pick those up either as we go along or in the Q&A session. And then finally, please do remember to mute yourself and turn off your video whenever you are not either speaking or need to be seen, to ensure a good connection and discussion. Good. So with that, let's get down to the meat of things. And what I want to do first is I want to call on Stephen Stone, who is Chief of UNEP's Resources and Markets Branch, to make some opening remarks. Please, Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Ned. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, wherever you are. I'm hoping that my dog doesn't bark too loudly in the middle of the seminar. She's sitting on the steps, and so far, so good. Well, colleagues, this discussion around eco-innovation and the future-proofing of small and medium-sized enterprises is very, very timely for four reasons. One is because of COVID-19, which was a lateral hit, which really changed everything. It changed business models, it changed political models, it changed health models. Over 200 million job equivalents lost last year, over 100 million people pushed into poverty, massive contraction in trade flows, massive disruption of supply chains. We're now seeing commodity price spikes and logistic spikes to supply chains, so a lot of disruption. So the whole concept of future-proofing, very timely, very important. Second reason, small and medium-sized enterprises, how did they fare? Well, they were hit like all others, and in some ways perhaps more, because they had less protection, they had less liquidity, they had less depth to draw upon. But interestingly enough, they also adapted very well. And the study that you just mentioned, Ned, and that we'll be talking about today, follows up. UNEP actually followed up on a cohort of small and medium-sized enterprises who adopted eco-innovation practices earlier in the decade. And it's very interesting to see the results. They were more resilient, they were more competitive, they were able to adapt to the challenges better. So teasing out those reasons, that causality, why was that so, is really, really interesting. The third reason is because we need to be forward-looking. And small and medium-sized enterprises are part of the future. They compose over 90% of the businesses worldwide. That's a World Bank estimate. We know that 2/3 of the labor force is in the informal economy, where a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises operate. That's my pet. Sorry, I hope it's not too disturbing. And there's huge spend on recovery as well. UNEP and Oxford tracked now it's about $16 trillion worth of announced spending to get the economies back up and moving again, up and running again, but in a way that doesn't repeat all of the past legacies. So green recovery, a green spending recovery, and SMEs have a big role to play there. Circularity has a big role to play there. And just to give an example, over 35 billion in the announced spending was for greening buildings and construction, where small and medium-sized enterprises have quite a lot to offer. So labor-rich and intentionally employment-rich pathways to greener recovery. The fourth and the final point that I want to make here in the opening remarks is the future really is now. We talk about future proofing, but there's a very interesting statistic that I learned recently. McKinsey actually estimates that these once in a lifetime supply chain disruption events are now happening around every 4 years. So COVID was obviously a once in a generation episode. But other supply chain disruptions from extreme weather events, from crop failures, from other supply disruptions are happening more and more frequently. So being resilient, being adaptive, being resource efficient is now at the very core of what performance means for small and medium-sized enterprises. And at UNEP, where we've just recently had our medium-term strategy adopted, which focuses on the triple planetary crisis, so climate instability, nature loss, and rising levels of toxicity and pollution, we know that eco-innovation can actually address all of those three crises, and really simultaneously. By being resource efficient, we can reduce pollution levels, we can reduce the impacts on the climate, our emissions, and we can reduce our footprint on nature while increasing the bottom line, which is what it's all about. So let me end here my opening remarks with a big thanks to you, Ned, for moderating the event today, to our partners in the European Union who have been generously funding a lot of UNEP's work, to other partners including ITC, UNIDO, the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, and many other partners who help us get to where we are today. And looking forward to a very good discussion with you all. Back to you, Ned.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks very much for that. Now let me call on Bettina Heller. Bettina is the program officer in UNEP's Consumption and Production Unit, and she's going to give us some background to this webinar. Bettina, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ned. And welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you today. Looking forward to the discussion. I would like to just give you a bit of a background of the publication that we are, so to say, relaunching today. So relaunching because we started working on EcoInnovation around 10 years ago, and this publication was published also at this time. And as Ned and Stephen said, we went on this journey to go back and talk to the SMEs, but also governments and technical intermediaries that we worked with in the past to see how are they doing now and how were they affected through COVID, and did actually EcoInnovation help them to be more resilient, and would we update our business case for EcoInnovation based on this? So today we are relaunching the updated version. And to start with, just to give you a bit of a definition of what EcoInnovation actually is in our understanding, it's an approach that guides business, in particular SMEs, so it was really developed specifically for SMEs, in integrating sustainability into their business. And it is it follows three key elements. So one element is that it integrates lifecycle thinking. So it really looks at the entire value chain at all lifecycle stages of a good or a service. And it helps companies to identify where the biggest impacts lie that they would want to tackle along the value chain. It's a strategic approach. So it really comes from top up to look at the business strategy. How could the entire business strategy and vision be changed to integrate sustainability throughout, and this will then translate into new business models and into changes in operations and products and services. And collaboration is also at its heart, so it's really about working with all partners in the value chain and thereby getting better outcomes. Now, what I wanted to also talk to you about is that EcoInnovation is very closely also linked to circularity. And it is an approach that's very well suited to help businesses to transition to more circular business models. Perhaps you already recognized when I defined what EcoInnovation is about that a lot of it also resonates with the concept of circularity. So again, lifecycle thinking is also key when it comes to circularity, as it inspires strategies that ensure materials retain their value in the economy indefinitely. Strategic changes to core business models are also crucial in that sphere. And again, it's all about collaboration and really making sure that all stakeholders are engaged in changing the system. So it's something that we've applied in the past already on circular business models, and we continue to do so now. Now, in terms of the outcomes of our research, so we really felt that these businesses that have applied EcoInnovation are more prepared to face external shocks. And as Stephen said, we've looked at it in the COVID context, but of course there are many shocks occurring regularly that businesses have to face. It's just that the current pandemic, of course, was at a scale that was unprecedented before. We found that EcoInnovation helps businesses to be more prepared to such shocks because these businesses have more diverse operations, because they are more prepared to adapt to new circumstances, because the way they are structured is already to be innovative, flexible, and to adapt. They have their operations already organized to be flexible and more modular. And again, this point around collaboration, because of strong relationships with customers, suppliers, communities, and employers, this also helps in times of crisis to be more resilient. At the heart of the business case for EcoInnovation lie 5 drivers. So these drivers, they were already established 10 years ago. And in our research, we found that they haven't changed, but more that they are strengthened in the current context. So I'm going to go through them. I'm not going to spend too much time. And I invite you, of course, to read the updated publication and have a look at this. But yeah, we just found that in the current time, also each of these drivers is more relevant than ever. And I'll give you some examples on why. So into the first driver for businesses and SMEs to engage in EcoInnovation is that it provides them access to new and emerging markets. This means more new market segments, because these are businesses that usually diversify their business model, but also access to the supply chains of large companies, of MNEs, who are increasingly looking also into sustainable procurement measures, as well as selling, for instance, to governments that are more and more putting into place sustainable public procurement measures. And we found that in terms of resilience and future-proofing, this is more relevant than ever, because surveys that were undertaken last year show that consumers really believe that sustainability should be considered by businesses. What's also interesting is that around half of consumers think that while their financial situation might now be more difficult than before COVID, the money that they would spend on products, they want it to be affordable, but also really for the products to do good for the environment and for people. And at the same time, also if we think about transparency, which becomes increasingly important, because end consumers, be they individuals, governments, or companies, they do want to know where the products come from. They have to be transparent and trace the products. And this really also helps to access new value chains and to maintain trust, which in periods of economic downturn is more important than ever, because the confidence falls. The second driver is increasing profitability along the value chain. So I said that before, working together with partners to find common solutions, and having a bigger gain than we would achieve if we would work alone. And in terms of resilience and future-proofing, this also remains very relevant, because it is easier to be resilient to the results of external shocks when you have good relationships in your value chain, but also it is easier to preempt shocks and to have good employee loyalty also during times of shock, and thus, again, to adapt the operations accordingly. The next driver is staying ahead of standards and regulations. So companies that apply EcoInnovation are typically front runners because they analyze the value chain and the market around them. They identify the hotspots, so the most important impact areas that need to be tackled, and they do that proactively together with other value chain partners. And thus they can be front runners and also help inform future regulations. In terms of future-proofing, at the moment we see a lot of regulatory requirements related to COVID-19 emerging, and this for sure will continue to be the case in the future. So again, eco-innovative companies can increase their competitive advantage, acquire industry leadership, and showcase their good practices to inform these processes. The next driver is attracting investment. So again, we see a trend that increasingly financial opportunities are also available to eco-innovative businesses. For instance, now, of course, what also Stephen mentioned in the beginning, we see many governments putting out stimulus packages, and some of these do have green criteria. So they do look into the sustainability of the measures, and companies that have already integrated sustainability into their business model, into their product offering, they are more ready to access these financial sources. When we look more at private sector funding, we also see a trend that especially long-term investors, they look for more resilient companies. And of course, they also look again for this transparency, and eco-innovative companies, they are more proactive around communicating and being transparent. So they would have a competitive edge there. And finally, there's a driver on increasing productivity and technical capacity. So eco-innovation, as it's such a holistic approach, it really triggers a change in the entire company. It means that different units, different departments of the company that maybe before did not work closely together will work together, because the sustainability aspects will affect every part of the company. So it also leads to this internal collaboration, but it also helps to acquire knowledge from the value chain partners, because it has this collaboration element. And in terms of future-proofing, one area where we see this is really very important is digitalization. And during COVID, we saw, of course, a huge demand for e-commerce. And here, digitalization and being able to really increase the technical capacity of the company and the employees are very crucial. Now, I would like to refer you also to the website where you can find the updated business case publication, but also other tools. We have this manual, which basically guides businesses and technical intermediaries working with those SMEs through the process of eco-innovation as really a hand step-by-step guidance. In the past and currently, we're usually working in countries with members of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Network, which have national cleaner production centers in their membership and are well suited to implement these with SMEs on the ground. I would like to finish just by mentioning one new project that we have and invite you also to check our website on this, which looks into applying eco-innovation in the textile sector. And we are there working in 3 countries in Africa, in Kenya, South Africa, and Tunisia. And we are happy to have one of the partners of the project with us in the panel today, so you're going to hear more from her later. But please do be in touch with us if you are also working in this area, and we'd be happy to exchange further. And with that, I'll pass back to you, Ned.
Good, thank you, Bettina. Thanks very much for that. So now we can turn to our panel discussion. And let me start by introducing the panel to you. I thought I'd get all of the introductions out of the way all in one go, and that would give us more time for the discussion. So let me start with Natalia Osorio. She joins us from Colombia, where she founded a company called Naturesse 11 years ago. Naturesse, which is an SME, but hopefully will one day be a very large company, makes personal care products with natural ingredients and essential oils. The company participated in UNEP's EcoInnovation project, which happened a few years ago. Then we have Zubeida Zwavel. She joins us from South Africa, where she is the director of the Center for African Resource Efficiency and Sustainability, CARES. CARES provides SMEs, particularly women-owned SMEs, with the tools and skills that they need to transition to become eco-innovative. CARES is also a partner in UNEP's INTEX project, this upcoming INTEX project. Then we have Sarah Mohan. She joins us from Switzerland, where she is Associate Program Officer with the SME Competitiveness Research Team of the International Trade Center, ITC. Sarah has been working on ITC's flagship report, Small and Medium Enterprises Competitiveness Outlook, which is due out soon. And finally, we have Stephen Stone, who is joining us from Paris. As Chief of UNEP's Environment Resources and Markets branch, Stephen directs a team dedicated to supporting countries on environmental and resource economics as key components of economic, trade, and investment policy. So as you can see, we have a panel of speakers who represent different perspectives in the conversation on eco-innovation, on resilience, on SMEs. I'm going to get the ball rolling by asking panelists some questions, each panelist some questions, but do please feel free to ask your questions. You can use the chat function, or of course there will be the Q&A at the end. And hopefully we'll pick up as many of those questions as we can, or perhaps even panelists can answer them in written form as we go along. So let me start with Natalia. So Natalia, Naturesse took part in UNEP's Eco-Innovation project, as I just mentioned. So what motivated you to join the project, and what benefits did Eco-Innovation bring to your company?
So we wanted to access new environmentally conscious customers, and we saw the project as an opportunity to revise our entire value chain. So being able to identify environmental hotspots that will allow us to improve our productivity and be able to expand into these new markets. So doing this, we were able to identify 2 hotspots on our soap line. So it is estimated that hotels, that was one of our main customers, discard 20% of the bar soap they buy. So we collaborated with our hotel customers and we collected the bar soap that the bar soap waste, to manufacture liquid detergent with the project. And we also were able to find new suppliers. Our main supplier for soap was abroad. So we were able to find a local RFA certified supplier, and this allowed us to save on import taxes, high transport fees, while reducing potential chain risk disruptions.
Sorry, I have to always remember to unmute. That's the rule, but I sometimes forget. So it's very interesting, actually, the things that you tried out through the Eco-Innovation project. But that was a few years ago now, right? So how is Naturesse continuing to engage and integrate sustainability into its business? And what are the main challenges you face in implementing Eco-Innovation? And what do you need to overcome them?
So we made it a part of our innovation process. So for this, like, packaging has been our priority. So we have partially switched to paper packaging derived from locust sugarcane. We also created a line of solid shampoo and conditioner products that do not require plastic packaging. So here we reduce the plastic use. And our commitment to incorporating environment into part of our operation has strengthened a lot our employee loyalty. And they feel like really personally engaged to do things sustainably and are motivated to go beyond what it is required. And this has helped like a lot, and they offer like a lot of help in difficult times. We also hired an environmental engineer that has helped a lot to collect and analyze data like on water, energy, and plastic use to improve our environmental performance. This allows us to stay like ahead of and comply with all the regulations. So the other question, the main challenges we face are a lack of expertise and capacity, like in critical areas such as sustainable packaging. That is one of our main goals. So local regulations that won't allow us to like reuse plastic bottles, or for example, install bulk dispensers for personal care products, say in retailers that would allow customers to bring their own containers. So to overcome all of this, I think that we need a lot of support from international agencies that can provide real facts and data, that can convince law regulations, that can convince our lawmakers, that can show like successful case studies in other countries, for small business owners to convince themselves that eco-innovation and sustainability are the way.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting your point about how eco-innovation can lead to greater commitment from your employees. That's really interesting. You've been very good, and you haven't gone over your time. So if I may, I'm going to ask you a third question.
Go ahead.
So COVID-19, right? So did the fact that you worked and you're working on eco-innovation, did that help you manage the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic? And if so, how did it help?
It actually did help a lot. So by expanding to new markets, as I mentioned before, when we did the project, we were only focused on hotel customers. So by expanding into new markets, we were able to continue operating. We entered into retail sales, and they actually increased. We were selling liquid soap and hand sanitizers. So lucky us that we were able to continue operating. And the fact that we had this employee loyalty and that our employees were very connected to the company. And we say that due to this commitment to sustainability, we were able to adapt our operations and continue operating very successfully.
Yeah, that's great. So we've heard from the field, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Sarah about COVID-19 and how innovation in a more general sense can help. But now I'd like to bring in Zubeida as a representative of support institutions to SMEs like Natalia's Naturesa. So Zubeida, you've worked with SMEs on eco-innovation and circularity in the past, and now you're part of the INTEX project. So how have your perceptions of eco-innovation and circularity changed in the time you've been working with SMEs?
Yeah, I think for around 20 years, my experience has shown that, I've seen the evolution of sustainable adoption within South Africa, specifically within SMEs. Initially, you would say that eco-innovation, circularity, and overall sustainability was seen as complex subjects to these companies, but it's now being shown that it's profitable and companies are able to thrive and survive. I was very glad to see that there's almost a natural flow. Listening to Natalia previously, she's actually proven that debunking myths of where green products actually cost money. Green products does not necessarily cost money. Resource efficiency and all sorts of other, and eco-innovation allows you to showcase that companies actually save money on, the financial bottom line. Also, what has increased the demand for these types of products and for the adoption of eco-innovation sustainability, I think, has been from the aspect of customers. Customers have also, within our area, they would like to know about information about how the products are being made. There's a new demand, there's niche markets. Companies have then adapted to this as well, in later years. They would like to, customers want to know about local supply, is also critical within South Africa. And the government itself has adapted strategies such as green procurement, which is in place, and that increases the demand from the aspect, and also the green economy, building blocks for job creation aspects, and innovation is key to that as well. So I was very glad to see that as I mean, many companies in South Africa have also shown the same type of trends and have shown that they can adopt these sustainability tools and save money and create new markets, access new financial strategies, and be able to survive. No longer business as usual is going to allow them to survive within the next 10 to 15 years. So they had to adapt to that. There's lots of examples I can give you, but I don't think we have time to go into all the details of, how companies have actually adopted these specific strategies within South Africa. But yeah, I'm glad to see that there is a clear case study and also within the business case development.
Yeah, I mean, that very much, I think, sort of mirrors my experience that it's initially companies were quite sort of skeptical about all of this, but I think they're beginning to understand that really there is a business case to be made here. And I'm really glad to hear that in South Africa, the government is trying to use the procurement tool as a way of creating markets. I think if governments really put its mind to it, that could be very powerful. But now, turning now to this Intex project that is about to start up and that you're involved in. So what do you think would be the interest of textile SMEs in South Africa to take part in this project? What would be driving them to come to this project?
The textile industry, and we've had this discussion with UNEP as a partner, the textile industry is quite mature in terms of sustainability within South Africa. They've looked at all sorts of SCP, sustainable consumption production types of tools. They've also worked with us on eco-labeling, resource efficiency. And so therefore, there's also different types of projects that has allowed this knowledge to be integrated into the sector itself. So South Africa currently has a master plan in place through the DTI, Department of Trade and Industry, and they're focusing on the localization of supply chains. Obviously, COVID-19 has shown that localizing the supply chains are more beneficial for companies because they cannot rely on, for instance, the fibers or the textiles coming from abroad. There's lots of delays in distribution. So companies have implemented EcoInnovation without them actually even being aware of it as well, and that is quite interesting. They look at examples such as lightweighting of products, utilizing less harmful chemicals within the products, also distribution networks. So these specific individual gains then hopefully accumulatively will then create some more momentum and also long-term benefits to the organization. But I think what eco-innovation definitely allows for is that top-down approach, so that cases are not, or rather projects are not seen as piecemeal when they're actually implementing these types of interventions, that it comes together, it is seen as a holistic approach, and that the gains at the end of the day is showcased through a holistic manner. It is ongoing, it is monitored, and they can actually say these are the savings that we have implemented as a company.
Well, you too, Zubaida, you've been very good and you've kept within your time. So that allows me to ask you another question.
I should have spoken more then.
Oh, no. So one thing that's always, interested me for support institutions like yours is, we make the business case for companies, but we also need to make the business case for support institutions. Why should support institutions continue to be working in these areas, continue to be promoting things like eco-innovation? So from that point of view, what do you think that CARES, your organization, can take away long-term, in a few 4 or 5 years from being an implementing partner in the Intex project?
So this Intex project is allowing us to now then take eco-innovation, circularity, aspects of sustainable business, and then not move it only within the textile sector, but then adopt it into other sectors itself. So the teachings of this project will then be lessons learned, and the positive impacts can then be replicated into sectors such as agro-processing, chemicals, also other intertwining supply and value chains. And also another benefit, I think, that came through, we recently did some collaborative training with Kenya and UNEP, obviously, and us, South Africa, as partners. Listening to them talking about what they're looking at in terms of Kenya working on natural fibers, we can definitely benefit from that collaboration as well. How can we actually adapt or adopt those types of new sectors, so to speak? What can we learn from them? So that, I think, is quite valuable. The dovetailing, I think, of other projects will allow then for EcoInnovation to take different forms. We also have something such as the eco-industrial park. So the eco-industrial parks is more of a, companies are set in industrial parks within South Africa, but then we can then utilize EcoInnovation to then take that down to the manufacturing individual companies or processing companies within the industrial parks itself. So I think there's huge benefits and replication and dovetailing and perhaps tailor making to specific areas as well. So yeah, there's some good long-term benefit to this project itself.
Excellent, good. No, because I'm always very concerned about the replicability, the idea that these projects are not standalone, that they lead to something more, a scaling up in some way at the end. All right, so now this allows me to turn now to Sarah, who can help us with the bigger picture. Sarah, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the research that ITC has done on the link between competitiveness in MSMEs and their resilience to external shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, well, ITC interviewed 770 firms before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. These were firms in Benin, Cambodia, and the Philippines. And what we found was that companies that had certain competitiveness characteristics fared better during the crisis. That is, they were more resilient. Now, resilience is the ability to absorb disruptions and emerge from crises as strong or stronger than before. And when we looked at the data from these firms, we found that practices that boosted the capacity to compete in the short term also improved the robustness of companies to shocks. So enterprises that had strong inventory management practices, that kept records, that had a bank account, they had the strong management and operational procedures that enabled them to withstand the stress of the pandemic. We also saw that the attributes that made companies more able to connect to their value chain partners gave them the relationships they needed to leverage their way out of the crisis. So companies that had strong links to buyers and suppliers, that had information, and that had a diverse set of suppliers as well, were able to reach out to those business ecosystem actors to get information and support during the pandemic. And finally, we found that companies who had a strong capacity to compete were able to respond to the pandemic in successful ways. So enterprises that had conducted research and development, that had good skills matching within the firm, and that had access to finance, they responded to the crisis in really inventive, effective ways in which they adapted to the new business environment and created solutions that sort of went with the flow. So we brought together all these attributes into a resilience index. And I have to say, we weren't entirely surprised when we saw that smaller firms tended to be less resilient. So micro and small firms, for example, were 20% less resilient than medium and large size firms. But there were, success stories on the small end as well. And these successes are important because resilience matters not just for the survival of the firms, but also to reduce the horrible sort of social and economic implications of their decline. We saw that resilient firms were 5 times less likely to let employees go during the crisis. So we really think that building this sort of general resilience that gets you through any crisis that may come is a good idea. It helps protect you from the COVID-19 crisis, from cybersecurity issues, maybe to the next climate crisis as well. So this general resilience is important, but of course we know, in the environmental context, that specific measures can help firms adapt to climate change. And in that context, we surveyed 1,359 firms in sub-Saharan Africa, and we found that 38% of them had already adopted some measure to reduce their exposure to environmental risks. So that's good news. Over a third of these enterprises had already adapted, but we again see a discrepancy on who is preparing for the future. So we saw that women-led firms tended to invest less in adaptation to climate change, and that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, your point about the small guys being the ones that find it most difficult. I mean, for sure, we all know that it's so important to get the small guys up to the medium size. There's a big death rate, if we can put it that way, in when you're small. But tell me now, when is this report going to be out?
So ITC is releasing its SME competitiveness outlook in June, at the end of June. So I will post the website towards the end of our call. But we have results as well around the business case that several other speakers have been talking about today as well.
Okay, so we can look forward to a good read in June. But now, just to focus now a little bit, because you talked about sort of general innovation. Do you see that eco-innovation needs specific policies to be in place to help them? What about the need to give more SMEs more access to financing, which is such an important issue?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, actually. In some cases, they don't need policies, and that's maybe a surprising answer. But of those businesses we interviewed in Africa, of the ones who said they had already invested in reducing their environmental footprint, 59% said that they had already gotten some business opportunities from it. So I think there are already, quick wins or low-hanging fruit or whatever you might want to call it that are already feasible for SMEs to adopt. So it's a matter of just spreading the word and providing some basic support. But there are a lot of green measures that are just not financially viable or feasible yet for SMEs. So 41% said that these investments were not paying off. And I think there does have to be some policy interventions, notably on the financial side, to strengthen the business case, to facilitate widespread take-up. And on the financial side, what we're seeing is that a lot of lending officers at the very grassroots level of our international financial system, they're not really counting the avoided harm from climate change interventions. So we really need some regulatory and awareness initiatives to make sure that bank officers, notably in developing country banks in rural areas, so when an SME comes to them and says, listen, I want to do this thing to avoid my future costs or to generate future revenues, they should count that in their risk return calculations. We also see that the green insurance market is booming, but sometimes it's not comprehensive enough, or it's very cumbersome or slow, and it needs to be made more accessible for SMEs for it to get to the scale in which it can be effective. And finally, I mean, there's a lot of great work being done in the green finance world, but it needs to mature a little bit more to come upon a set of harmonized metrics that all SMEs know for sure they can use to show off what they're doing so that they can get the finance they need for it. And also on the regulatory side, of course, there's a role for getting finance that way, incentives for SMEs to adopt solar panels, for example, and regulatory incentives that think small first, that think about the transition periods SMEs need to mobilize internal and external financing. That's quite important, as well as the expertise that a speaker mentioned earlier. We've also heard that this is really important to get the kind of technical expertise you need to make these things feasible for SMEs.
Yes, indeed. We still have many things to do to get this all going. All right, let me bring in the last of our panelists, Stephen. So Stephen, for you, where do you see the role of SMEs and real economy actors in spurring a more resilient recovery as part of the future proofing that we're discussing today?
Yeah, thanks, Ned. It's been a great discussion. I really enjoyed hearing about the advances in Colombia and in South Africa. And Sarah, also what the ITC is doing with this sort of the surveys and actually getting the numbers and getting a real sense of what's happening on the ground. I think it's tremendously important work. You know, as I said, I think SMEs just have a huge role to play just because of their sheer size, the volume of SMEs that are out there. I mean, the fact that over 90% of businesses fall into that category, they're very numerous. Over 2/3 of the labor pool in the whole world is in the informal sector. So you can't ignore them. They're in the critical path. And I think the focus there is absolutely spot on. You know, one thing that I struggle with here, and I was listening to Sarah, is how do you reach the bottom of the pyramid? How do you get the horizontality? Because, you know, with technological innovation, we have a lot more horizontality, right? We can reach a lot more people simultaneously, but we also have this tendency to verticalize. So bigger chains, sort of winner takes all. That, I think, is the real challenge for the SMEs. How do they build on their advantage of being small and nimble and reap the gains of horizontality? For example, fintech, right? What kind of opportunities are there through fintech that can play to their strength? And these are some questions that perhaps we could tease out with our colleagues from Colombia and South Africa as well. But absolutely, you know, they're in the critical path. We need to work with them and we need to understand how we can work with them effectively. Unmute?
Yes, unmute. Coming to the topic, which I love very much, circularity, just for a minute. So EcoInnovation can certainly be a powerful tool in helping companies to make the transition to circularity. But who are the big stakeholders that we need on board to achieve circularity through EcoInnovation? Who do we have to get around the table on this one?
Yeah, I mean, and that is such a big question, because going back to the size, right? The question of the size, the number of SMEs, you know, how do you overcome the transaction costs of dealing with them? How do you reach scale when you have so many, you know, atomized players that are out there? I think that would also be really interesting to hear from Sarah and colleagues on that one. But I mean, basically at UNEP, for us, it's all hands on deck. You know, this challenge is too enormous, it's too big, it's too urgent. I mean, people talk about we have a decade to transition, and the 2020s are the decade of action, which are off to a horrible start, right? With COVID just locking everything down and disrupting everything. But this is our decade to reach the 2030 agenda. So we need the public sector, we need policies that support this graduation, this maturation, this maturity of the small and medium-sized sector, so that we don't look down at them as some kind of second-class citizen. No, this is the grassroots of productivity, and we need to find ways of working with them, and we need policies that are tailored to their size and to their ability there to move. So thinking about norms, standards, labels, how do we do this in a way that doesn't impose more barriers to their growth but supports their innovation? Finance is another one that we touched on. How do we actually make finance more accessible, more tangible for these players? And then finally, something that Bettina touched on as well is the consumers, the role of consumer demand. So as consumer preferences shift and companies like Natureza spring up and respond to that sort of like green shift, how do we encourage that in consumers as well? How do we reach them? Including, by the way, you know, the public sector. So public procurement, which is a huge spend side on public demand as well. So those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, certainly your comments about SMEs sort of rings very, very true with me, having spent 20 years at UNEP, essentially focusing on the SMEs in the developing countries and how to move them forward. Okay, fine. Well, that finishes my questions. Sorry, I've been very selfish and taking up all this time. It's now time for you guys out there to be able to ask questions of our panelists. I'm looking at the chat here. There is one question that I've been asked, maybe I could put to Zubaida. So Zubaida, this one is for you. How were some of the small enterprises responding to calls to adapt? What are the mechanisms that they were using? And maybe Sarah, maybe you have something to say on this too from your research. So Zubaida, do you have anything on that?
I think from our perspective, because resource efficiency has been a huge catalyst in our area, or rather our region, in terms of adopting sustainability. And by mechanisms, I would, you're referring to sustainability mechanisms, tools that they've actually utilized within the organization?
Let's assume that.
Yeah. So that's because we use mechanisms and tools very loosely. So that's kind of, I think, been a huge catalyst in South Africa: resource efficiency, cleaner production, and then adopting all sorts of other SEP tools. But the resource efficiency has definitely been the platform where SMEs has seen that green productivity, improving manufacturing processes, optimizing their systems has definitely given them financial gain. And that is the key to resource efficiency, that it actually looks at environmental, coupling environment and financial gain together. But there's, to a lesser effect, the social side of things. And I think that's where eco-innovation and other life cycle approaches actually come in, where you're bringing in all three aspects of the triple bottom line. But I think that has been the driver within South Africa. And also, yeah, other pull and push factors, which I don't think we really want to go into more detail right now.
No, that's fine. That's good.
I hope that covers
Sarah, that's good. That's good. Sarah, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would tend to concur. I agree that in the work of ITC, some of the resource efficiency initiatives that are really what you would call, win-win-wins every way around. If you change your chemical management practices, and within 2 years you save, you make net gains. These are the kind of measures that the SMEs that we work with really jump on, because they say, wow, it's great. It fits with my ideals. It fits with the bottom line. It improves employee loyalty. It's excellent. Now, the thing is that there are bigger interventions that are also available. But whether companies adopt them, it really depends on their foresight into the future and how much they count it. So one interesting thing that I've always found is that we see that family firms, family-owned enterprises, they see sustainability in a slightly different light. Like in one interview, I know a farmer said, "I'm doing this for my children and my children's children, because the soil will still grow for them." So I think that instilling maybe some of those sustainability values is important, but especially making the bottom line argument in terms of keeping current markets, getting new ones, reducing costs. Those are the arguments that resonate most in our constituencies.
But actually, your point about the person who was saying, "Well, I'm thinking of my children and my grandchildren," this actually goes well with this question that I have in the chat, which is, what is the most important cultural change that we need to see in MSMEs to have them make in order to support eco-innovation? Any of my panelists want to tread on that one? Stephen, what do you think?
I was thinking I would love to hear what Natalia has to say about that, because she's actually at the tipping point of what. Yeah, I would really like to hear from someone who's actually got their hands deep inside of it. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Natalia.
I have to say that it turns to be like what we want for our children and our grandchildren. It turns out to be that when I became a mother, like I started thinking, when I started Naturez 11 years ago, I thought like, yeah, I want this to be like a green business, and I had no children. But after I became a mom, it has become my obsession. So yes, it has to be that, like, for our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah, in fact, I think this is I think we should use children much more than we have to change the parents. I mean, I know of at least 1 or 2 cases where CEOs of companies, and large companies actually, admitted that they had, if you want, made the commitment to a greener way of doing things in their companies because of their children, because their children actually criticized them for not doing it. And so maybe we should be thinking of using the educational system, get down to the primary school and secondary school, and get a message across to the kids so that the kids can then take it home, as governments have often done with many other social policies. Actually, they've used the kids to change the parents. Okay, let's see now. I think we have time for perhaps one or two questions. Let's have a look. This is a good one. Yes, we don't really have any consumers here, anybody, except we are all consumers. But somebody here is asking, how does eco-innovation really help consumers? Are they really aware of environmental impacts? So what do we think of that? Yeah, go on, Stephen.
Okay, so I would love that one, because I think there's two aspects to it. One is the full cost, right? Consumers often don't know what they're buying, or the value or the cost of what they're buying. So there was a really interesting experiment in Germany where they wanted to put two price tags. One was the market price of what they were consuming, and the other was the economic cost of the item they were consuming. And there can be huge differences, right, for things like related to oil palm based foods, or other things that health impacts or nature impacts. So I think part of that's sort of raising the consumer awareness around what the footprint is of what we're actually doing. The other thing I think is that, it can actually just be so much better for you. If you're an informed consumer, particularly when it comes to things that you eat, it's so much better to know about them. And I think you have a better relationship to the world and to nature as well. So, I mean, that whole question about sort of reaching an equilibrium with the future, with your children, and with your place with nature, which we realize after this COVID lockdown, those who have been stuck in cities, for example, in apartments, are really suffering, where those who have access to nature. So it's the same thing. It's sort of going beyond consumers to actually resetting that relationship with nature, and how we consume has a large role to play in that, I think.
For sure. And I definitely take up your point about that consumers often don't see the true cost in their purchases of what they're doing. I think we need to do a lot more work about sort of internalizing essentially these externalized costs. There was one great comment here, question. Where's it gone now? Help. Yeah, this one. I think this is very important in terms of eco-innovation, at least as UNEP understands it. How can one ensure that all parties along the value chain work together on sustainability issues? It's easier to say, well, I'm going to work with my partners in the value chain, but especially if you're an SME, it can be very hard to persuade others in your value chain to actually work together with you on sustainability issues. Any comments on that? Zubaida, maybe good. Sarah, you've stepped up to the plate. Excellent. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to point to all the effective work that's being done, I mean, by UNEP and ITC and several other actors to mobilize digital technologies, UNECE, for example, to mobilize digital technologies to allow sustainability information to be transmitted along value chains. So, I mean, obviously, sustainability standards help in that endeavor. But there's also a question of governance here about whose sustainability priorities are taken into account as you move to green the value chain. And I think in that sense, it's important to have, to learn from suppliers about what their problematics are, what they need, and to report and innovate across the value chain, including using blockchain and other digital technologies.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm sure we could go on discussing all afternoon, but unfortunately, we have to bring this to a close. We're nearly at the time up. So I hope all of you have found this panel and the presentations that were made at the beginning instructive and useful. I want to thank all of our panelists for giving us their precious time to take part, especially when they are at far-flung ends of the world. Just to remind you that UNEP will post the recording online, and if you requested it, we'll keep you informed about their work in this field. And if you haven't, I would really strongly recommend that you do, because I think this is a very interesting part of work that is being done. So with that, I just want to thank you all for attending this. Bid you goodbye till the next time we meet, and please stay safe. Bye bye.